Well, joining me live from Canberra now is the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Treasurer, good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. So what will the cost of this lockdown be to the economy?
Well, I said to the Parliament back in May that were we to go back to a full lockdown and see restrictions in place that were there prior to the National Cabinet agreeing in 3 stages to ease restrictions, then it could cost the Victorian economy up to $1 billion a week. Now, the next couple of weeks are going to be vitally important. We're hoping the spread of the virus is contained, but developments in Victoria are very serious. There's not only the health challenge, but there's also the economic challenge. And we're very much focused on providing Victoria with as much support as they need. The Prime Minister and the Premier spoke yesterday, as well as speaking multiple times in recent days. We've deployed Australian Defence Force personnel to Victoria, where they have more than 800 Commonwealth officials working in Victoria in various capacities to support the effort to stem the tide of new cases. And so we'll continue to provide the financial and the physical support necessary.
OK, well, you mentioned $1 billion a week to the Victorian economy. That's the cost over 6 weeks, $6 billion. What sort of flow-on effect will that have on the national economy?
Well, Victoria is about a quarter of the national economy, and obviously what happens in Victoria matters to the rest of the nation, and particularly it goes to consumer and business confidence and the speed and the trajectory of the recovery. So that's why what happens in Victoria will really make a difference to what happens across the country. And Victoria's success in stemming the tide of new cases will be Australia's success. This is not a time for state of origin. This is a time for us all to work together.
You've got an economic statement due in a couple of weeks. How much of that has to be redone now?
Oh, look, we've been working, diligently on the details of that statement, and obviously we're continuing to watch the situation not only in Victoria but across the nation when it comes to the economic recovery. I do point out that we did see some very positive signs prior to this new wave of cases in Victoria. Consumer confidence had picked up around 90% off its lows, Pete. Business confidence had picked up 70% off its lows. Manufacturing activity was nearly back to pre-COVID levels, and we saw retail sales in May having a big boost. So it's important that we stem the tide of new cases, we throw resources at the challenge, and that's what the Commonwealth and Victoria will be doing.
Still a lot of people without jobs, though, at the moment, Treasurer. So how much of those businesses who somehow survived that first lockdown won't make it this second time around?
Well, we're hoping that, to give every business the best opportunity to get through this very challenging period. We have already provided more than $10 billion into the Victorian economy through the JobKeeper and the Cash Flow Boost programs alone. And that's providing necessary support at a time when these businesses and families need it most. The Prime Minister and I have both said there'll be another wave, another phase of support that will go to the people who need it. And we've also seen the announcement today from the banks and the prudential regulator that there'll be an extension for 4 months for the loan deferrals, and that's very welcome as well.
OK, well, you brought up JobKeeper there. What sort of targeted support measures will be applied to Victorians beyond September?
Well, Pete, again, we know that the 6-week lockdown announced by Daniel Andrews will take up to the end of August, and we know that JobKeeper and JobSeeker is legislated to the end of September. What we will do is continue to provide the support that is necessary for businesses and families right across the country, and the details of that next phase of support will be announced on the 23rd of July.
So there will be targeted support measures specifically to Victorians beyond September?
Well, we have said we'll provide targeted support to those who need it. We adopted a series of principles going into this pandemic and the economic response, and they've guided us and served us well, namely that the measures we've announced have been temporary, they've been targeted, they've been scalable, and they've been proportionate to the challenge that we face. And that will continue to be the case for any new announcements we make.
There are calls for the hospitality sector and the aviation sector to receive extended JobKeeper payments until next year. Is that possible?
Well, we're focused on sector and economy-wide support simultaneously. So as you know, we made an announcement of $250 million in support for the arts sector. We've made an announcement about the housing sector. We've made an announcement about aviation, the aviation sector, as well as tourism. When it comes to the hospitality sector, the best thing you can do is stem the tide of new cases, ease the restrictions, and that will create more jobs. And we were starting to see that trend prior to this crisis. So let's wait to the 23rd of July when we'll provide more details. But we have to acknowledge that JobKeeper and JobSeeker are currently legislated to the end of September.
But this has changed the game, hasn't it, for you? This has changed the game, this lockdown in Melbourne.
This is a serious impediment to the recovery, to the speed and the trajectory of the nation's economic recovery, not just Victoria. I mean, Victoria is a quarter of the nation's economy, and what happens in Victoria matters to the rest of the nation. That's why this needs to be a full court press, not just from the Commonwealth Government and the Victorian Government, but indeed from all governments to support efforts in Victoria to ensure that we don't see a spread of new cases beyond what we've already seen, and indeed beyond the boundaries of Victoria into other states.
And will the childcare subsidy scheme be reinstated for Victorians?
Well, Daniel Tian is already making some announcements about the flexibility in relation to those childcare announcements, because again, we recognise that with the recent developments in Victoria, some kids will not be able to go to childcare, and we want to ensure that those businesses remain sustainable and viable.
And this will be possible, won't it? These changes, these schemes are possible to be reinstated in other states if for whatever reason they get shut down again, because remembering that is possible. Let's say there's an outbreak in New South Wales and the system needs to be shut down again. Can these schemes continue to be reinstated?
Well, Pete, again, we'll continue to provide the support that is necessary for the public at this difficult time, as we have. I mean, we've announced $260 billion of economic support. That's more than 13% of GDP. It's been not just an economic boost, but it's also been a psychological boost for the nation. And what we've seen in Victoria with a spike in cases is not the first, and it will not be the last time we'll see new cases across Australia, and we have to be prepared for these challenges, and that's why our health response is going to be so critical.
Did you think it was a bit rich?
Few weeks
Sorry,
are going to be so vital.
Did you think it was a bit rich for the Premier yesterday to kind of criticise the people of Victoria when it was the failings of a private security firm that may be blamed for this outbreak?
Well, the Premier himself has admitted that mistakes have been made and that there's a judicial inquiry underway into those quarantine issues. But what I'm focused on is the future, not the past. Obviously, we don't want to see a repeat of those mistakes. But what we need to focus on is getting the health support to those people who need it, ensuring that we have effective quarantine measures, appropriate social distancing measures, and of course, contact tracing and testing in large numbers, because that is how you can stem the tide of new cases.
And you did mention the banks extending their support for another 4 months, Treasurer. Must be something of a relief.
Well, we welcome this announcement by the banks and the prudential regulator. We have been working with both parties in recent weeks to see an extension of the relief and support to Australian families and businesses. The initial 6-month loan deferrals provided by the banks supported some $266 billion worth of loans. Some 800,000 customers were benefiting, and of those loans, around 60% were residential mortgages and the rest were commercial loans. So this extension for another 4 months is very welcome.
Okay, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Always good to be with you, Pete.